One of the reasons we love Alireza Firouzja games is that he never backs down from a fight. He will always look for a line that gives him winning chances, makes it difficult for his opponent. And this game played against Wesley So is a great example of that. So it was played in the Paris Blitz event last year. The event was part of the Grand Chess Tour, which Firouzja's now confirmed for this year as well, and again he'll be playing against Wesley So. I love the games that these guys play, and I'll link another amazing one at the end of this video. So let's have a look here. Firouzja had white, Wesley black. It's only 32 moves of madness, really fun to watch. And if you love a daily chess upload, love Firouzja as much as I do, click that subscribe button if you're new here, never miss a daily video. So on with the show, we had pawn to d4, and Firouzja goes in for this Trompovsky attack with an immediate bishop to g5 here. So we had pawn to d5, we had pawn e3 now, pawn c5, and now bishop takes on f6, shattering the pawn structure. So in these lines, you're going for a quick initiative with white, but you're giving up the bishop pair, so endgames are decent for black long term. We had pawn takes on c5 now, and this is the exact same way that Firouzja played against Levon Aronian 3 rounds earlier. But there Levon played pawn to e6. And I mention this because then Firouzja was able to play c4 immediately. In this position, you can't go pawn to d4 or white simply wins that pawn. But in the game, against Wesley So, played in this one, knight c6 was played instead of e6. And what this means is that Firouzja can't go pawn c4 in one, or now pawn d4 comes, and this looks nice for black. That pawn's well protected, and it starts to make this bishop look a bit silly. Black has a good game. So that's why Firouzja goes bishop to b5 first in this game, coming outside the pawn chain, pinning that knight, so that after pawn to e6, now he goes pawn c4. So that pawn is now captured, same as Levon played. There's no d4 anymore. We had knight d2, again refusing to get the queens off the board, just like we saw in that game. Firouzja wants to keep the tension, he wants to go for an attack. The bishop now took on c5, the other knight developed to f3, and now this pawn c3 move was chucked in by Wesley. So he's compromising the white pawn structure by doing this, but he has lost some time. Castles was now played by Wesley, Alireza did the same, and now pawn to f5 is very logical. It covers the e4 square from this knight or even the pawn, and it opens up the dark squares so that the queen can come out and help in the defense of the king later on. We now had this knight coming into d4, looks very logical. You don't want to take here, you repair the white pawns, white has a good game. So instead bishop d7 was played, defending this c6 square. We now had rook to b1, so it comes to that half open file. If ever you don't know where to put your rooks, just put them on half open files, or open files for that matter. And rook c8 was played, Wesley does similar, coming to the half open file, eyeing this pawn here. And now we had queen to h5, so this is what I was saying, Firouzja wants that quick attack, and queen f6 comes across to defend the king, stay in that danger zone so that you don't get checkmated. We had rook f to d1 coming to the open file, queen g6 offers the trade, but Firouzja drops the queen back, he wants to keep them on the board. The other rook came to the d file now by Wesley, and this is now a classic example of Firouzja's fighting style. So the opening phase of the game is complete. You have to find a plan here as white. How do you proceed? Well, one way to play and keep a very stable advantage, you can imagine Magnus playing like this, is just taking on c6. After the bishop recaptures, bishop takes. You could take with the rook, it gets quite tactical, there's a lot of pressure coming here. So pawn takes is best, and now knight f3 can come. And you can see that white has the slightly better pawn structure. The knight could hop in here, maybe later to c4. You've already got rooks on open lines, so it's a stable and small advantage for white, but nothing too much. But Firouzja doesn't play like this. He wants to keep pieces on the board. He goes knight 2 to f3. And I love this about his style, because after queen f6, covering this e5 square from some jumps, we now have pawn to e4. He's shaking it up in the centre of the board. Now the classic response here would just be taking that pawn on e4. After all, you did put the pawn on f5. And we could have had a line like this: queen captures, knight takes here, but then after pawn recaptures, you're giving up one of these bishops and losing your bishop pair. So you could have a line like this, say captures here, bishop c6, queen e3. And black is a tiny bit better, but you've lost the bishops. It's not so clear whether you can generate winning chances. And this is what's so great about Wesley. He also wants to generate winning chances where he can. So he goes bishop b6 instead, keeping his bishop pair, because after captures here, obviously you don't want to take back like this straight away. The pawn structure looks horrible. Instead, we had this in between move. So captures on d4. The pawn recaptured here. Now the queen took back. So you've kept the bishop pair. You're playing against this isolated queen's pawn now, but black has to contend with a white initiative. So the queen is kicked and comes back. Queen e4 threatens to check here, but actually h6 was just calmly played by Wesley. He takes g5 away from the knight, and actually this threat isn't so scary. You can just move the king to the side. The queen covers quite nicely here, and even if you did check there, well, the king can sit on e7. There's no dark squared bishop for white. So we didn't have this queen h7 move. We had queen g4 check. The queen now blocked, and again, if Firouzja just stepped away, you just can't afford to exchange those queens, go into an endgame against the bishop pair and with the IQP. So bishop a4 was now played by Wesley, and it's a beautiful use of these bishops, asking an uncomfortable question of this rook. Now best was actually sliding up to d2, keeping an eye on this pawn, because you can't take the pawn immediately, or we have this classic tactic. After we have these captures here, you win back the piece by going with this check, takes here, white is ahead as we can see. But you wouldn't have to take that pawn as black. Instead, you could just play, say, rook to d6, start increasing the pressure on the d-file. It's a very uncomfortable and passive position for white. So once again, Firouzja goes for the active move, rook e1. This is blitz chess, of course, but now he gives that pawn. And you don't want to recapture here immediately, or then the rook jumps in with decisive effect, hitting here, hitting here. If you defend with queen h6, then bishop c6 continues the initiative for black. There's a threat to take here, checkmate the king, black's all over white in this position. So instead of going takes on d4, Firouzja went rook to e4 here. He swings that one up, looks at these bishops, looks at the g4 square. But very calm now from Wesley, simply bishop to f6 here. He hits the white queen, it drops back to h3, and he then takes this bishop on d3. So what's going on? How is Firouzja going to proceed here? He's a whole piece down. Well, best here was actually taking this bishop on a4 immediately. Firouzja didn't play this, he played rook g4, skewering the queen to the king. So bishop g5 is forced. Now he took on a4, but actually this was a mistake in the time trouble. He leaves Wesley with a brilliant tactic. If you want to pause and look for it, please do so. So Wesley plays the awesome move, queen to b2. Now you're decoying this rook away from the back rank if that's taken. Now you can mate with either one of the rooks. This one's good enough, the knight drops back, that's checkmate. So after queen b2, the rook dropped away to f1. Now we had rook c1 coming to that back rank anyway. g4 gave the king some room, but now simply takes was played. You can't take back with the queen or you drop the knight. So the king took back, and now queen b5 was actually the final move of the game. The rook is attacked here. There's threats against the king. So say you save the rook with rook takes on a7. Well, there's different ways to win, but simplest is just takes with check. The king moves, you pick up the queen. That's going to be mate shortly. So I love the fact that Firouzja never backs down. Even though he lost the game, we love that fighting spirit about him. If you want to see another amazing Wesley Firouzja game, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.